anyway, like I was saying, we're all very conscious of money right now. We're conscious of ways to save money. We're conscious of ways to cut expenses, all those kinds of things. But food is something we can't cut. It's an expense that we have to have because we have to eat, right? So one really important thing to think about is how can we make that food budget stretch? And that's what I want to talk to you about today. It's interesting. I've done a lot of things in relation to this over the years. I've spent a lot of time learning how to cook what you might call the old-fashioned way. It's just something I enjoy doing. So it's just something I've always done. Cooking the old-fashioned way, using a lot of scratch ingredients, those kinds of things. We're going to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about ways to make your food last that you buy so it doesn't go, bad in the fridge, and just lots of different things. So I'm excited to share these things with you today. So, like I said, we're all tightening our belt right now. We're tightening our belt in a lot of different ways. We're having to get creative about it. And, I shared with my team that years ago, my family and I used to do what we call $100 months, where we would dedicate 1 month and all we were going to spend was $100. Now, that didn't include things like gas money, that sort of thing. But everything else, including food, had to come out of that $100 for that month. So we were relying a lot on food storage that month. But what it did is it enabled us to get really creative. I remember one time we were doing this was during the month of October, and all of my kids wanted to get pumpkins for Halloween. Well, I knew that I could not spend, $10 or whatever it might cost of my $100 budget that month on pumpkins, especially because Halloween's the last day of the month and I was so out of money by then. So I was driving around thinking about this one day, and I drove past a house and there was a sign out front that said free pumpkins. I ordinarily probably wouldn't have stopped because it was on my mind and I was looking for creative ways to save money. I stopped, I knocked on the door, we got some great free pumpkins for my kids, and I didn't have to spend any of that $100 budget. So it does give us the opportunity to be creative. And I encourage you to look at it this way, as a challenge. Don't look at it as a deprivation or, oh no, this is so hard and terrible. Look at it as a challenge. How can I really figure out a way to feed my family, feed them incredible food, incredibly healthy food, good food, and do it for a lot less money? And it's possible. So I'm excited to be able to share some of these ideas with you. The first thing I want to talk about is how to store your food properly. I saw a research study that talked about in the United States that 1/3 of the food that we purchase goes in the garbage. Now, how sad is that? I mean, think about that. 1/3 of the food that we purchase gets thrown away. And at first I didn't believe it, but then I started thinking, okay, even if you think about the stems of things you cut off, that's a part of it that goes in the garbage, right? How about the food that sits in the fridge in leftover version that gets thrown away? How about the stuff that makes its way to the bottom of the produce drawer and gets really slimy in its bag and gets thrown away? Or the food that gets thrown away on our plates because we dish up too much, or, just those things, a little bit by little bit, it gets thrown away. That's thousands of dollars thrown away. Well, it's thousands of dollars we don't have right now. We really don't have any time, right? These are things that we should do all the time, but especially right now. So let's talk about storage. Air is usually the problem. It's usually the reason that the food accelerates, or the spoilage of food accelerates. So a couple of tips to always follow. First of all, lids. If you have a lid on anything, make sure that lid is on tight. It's going to keep out the air again. If there's any sort of a seal on a resealable bag, get all the extra air out before you seal that bag, because the food inside of there is going to stay better. If you have sealable containers, so like in this top picture here, these are actually my favorite kind of containers, the kinds that snap down on the side. If you're using a container like this, use a container that's the closest to the size of the amount of food that you have to store, because the less air you have at the top of that food, the longer it's going to last. So these are all just things to think about, how to keep out the air when you're storing dry goods. So that would be the picture at the bottom here. So, beans, rice, flour, those kinds of things. If you put a bay leaf, just a dried bay leaf, it comes in the spice section, a dried bay leaf in with it, it will deter bugs. I had a nasty thing. We were cleaning out what we call our get home bags that are in our cars, cleaning them out, getting them updated. This whole earthquake scare and pandemic, is a little bit, it gets everybody awake a little bit. And we were cleaning out the bags. I opened up my bag that had been in the back of my car for, I don't know, it's been three or 4 years probably. It was full of weevil. If you know what weevil is, they're little bugs that get in flour. And I had some packages of tuna and crackers in there. And I guess that had something had come to life inside of there. It was full. Everything in that entire bag was full of weevil. It was so nasty. So put bay leaf in. Make sure that you preserve the dried goods. Produce is a little different. So most produce, we actually want to get just a little bit of air. You want a little bit of air circulation. So if you store it in the bag that it comes from the grocery store in, you're going to get no circulation at all. In fact, just this week, I was filming a video on this topic, and I went to see what I might have living in the bottom of my produce drawer. And sure enough, there was a bag of slimy cilantro living in the bottom of that produce drawer because I had stored it in the bag that came from in the grocery store. There was no air circulation, and that had turned to slime. Now, if there's too much air circulation, it would have dried the cilantro out. Well, I would have much preferred dried cilantro than slimy cilantro. So you don't keep them in those produce bags. Put them in a resealable bag. Leave the resealable bag slightly open. Just leave it cracked a little bit. You can reuse those bags. That's one thing that we're doing a lot of now is we're thinking, how can we reuse this? You wash the bag, you stand it upright while it dries. My mother-in-law has been doing this for a bazillion years. And you can reuse those Ziploc bags over and over and over again. Potatoes, garlic, those kinds of things. You want to store those. They can store for forever. I've had some potatoes out in my root cellar, but they'd been in my basement up until just about a month ago, but they're out in the root cellar. I've been storing them since September. So it's been 6 months now, and they're getting some sprouts on them, but you know what? We had them for dinner yesterday and they were just fine. So potatoes, garlic, onions, they can last a long time, but they need to be stored in a cool place, in a dry place, and out of sunlight. And store them away from fruit, because fruit and onions, fruit and potatoes, they put off the fruit puts off an ethylene gas that actually speeds up the spoilage of potatoes and onions and things. So keep them in different places when you're storing some of those foods. Those are just ways to store to hopefully prolong the life of the food you get. There's nothing more depressing than spending money on food and have it go bad in your fridge, on your counter, wherever it might be. Temperature and time. So this is another interesting thing about storage. Your refrigerator should be 40 degrees or cooler, and get a real thermometer. These thermometers are like $2. Get a thermometer, stick it in your fridge, and just see, because it may be that little dial that's across the top has nothing to do with what the temperature of the fridge or the freezer actually is. Get a thermometer, throw it in there for a couple days and see what it tells you. The fridge should be 40 degrees or colder. The freezer should be 0 degrees and colder. But here's an interesting little thing to know. The door is actually about 4 to 5 degrees warmer than the rest of the refrigerator. So you should never put anything perishable in that outside door. That would include eggs, yogurt, milk, those kinds of things should not go in the door. That door should be kept exclusively for really hearty things like mustard and ketchup. That's what should be in that drawer. Nothing that's perishable or that can expire, because that door is actually 4 to 5 degrees warmer than the rest of your fridge. If you have something that does expire, put it in the back of the fridge. Now, the back of the fridge is a danger zone, right? Because things get sucked into the back of the fridge and we don't know they were there, and we never find them again until much later when they should have been thrown away a long time ago. So what I challenge you to do, particularly this time, is really take stock of what's in that fridge. Clean stuff out if you're never going to use it so that you can see what's in there. And every day or so, go through there and see what's inside. And we'll talk a little bit about what to do with the food that you find inside of there. But go through there, really inventory what you have in that fridge, because that is money. Just look at that food as money, like money sitting right there on your shelf. That's money, and you certainly wouldn't throw money away, so don't throw the food away. Okay, now let's get into some of the practical things about what we can do with the food that we have. Make food yourself. Now, one thing that's really kind of nice about this shelter-in-place sort of thing is that we can't really go anywhere. So my family, they keep saying, can we go out to eat? You know, these are things that we would have done a couple of times a week. And we've just said, no, we're not going to go out to eat because we don't know who's been making that food. You know, we know that when we make it here at home, that it's going to be, you know, safe and clean because it's made by me or by my kids, or, you know, whomever is making the food. So make food yourself. This is a great time. We all have a little bit of extra time to really practice making some food, and you'd be amazed at how much money you can save. So let's talk about that. This one we're going to have a few more details on, because this is a place that I think people can really make a difference in their food budget. So beans and grains. Beans and grains are hearty staples that have been around for forever, that most societies use, especially societies that are more poor, I guess is the easiest way to say it. They have staples of beans and rice. There's many countries throughout the world that's pretty much the staple of life is beans and rice. Why? Why are they using that as a staple? Because it's extremely inexpensive. That's the main reason. The second reason is because it's very filling, it's very hearty, and it's actually pretty nutritious. You put beans and rice together and it makes what's called a perfect protein. So it's something that your body needs. It's interesting. So I want to talk to you about how to make beans and grains on your own. And it's extremely simple. It's just you have to plan ahead a little bit. So let's talk about that planning ahead. For beans, well, actually for anything, grains or beans, I recommend that you soak them overnight. It doesn't have to be overnight. Sometimes it only has to be a couple of hours, but for me, it's just easier to, as you know, kind of the evening's winding down, to say, okay, what am I going to make for dinner tomorrow? All right, I'm going to make this and this and this. I put it in a bowl on the counter, I cover it with about 1 inch of water, and we leave it and go to bed for the night. And that's all you do. That's how you soak beans or grains. Put it in a bowl, cover it with water, leave it overnight. That's it. The next morning, you're going to rinse that thoroughly because you want to get off, this is another long talk, but you want to get off what are called the phytic acid or the anti-nutrients, let's say that are on the outside of those grains that are going to make those grains less nutrient dense for you. So you're going to rinse them really well. You're not going to use the water that you soaked it in to cook them in. Then you're going to add new water. You're going to cover beans by at least 2 inches. The reason for they are going to swell. So you want to cover them by at least 2 inches. Grains, rough rule of thumb is 2 cups water to 1 cup grain. It's not always true, but that's a rough measurement to always use. When you're cooking grains, add salt at the beginning because it will make them taste much better. When you're cooking beans, do not add salt at the beginning or they may never get soft. Beans actually will toughen the coating on the outside of the bean, or salt will toughen the coating on the outside of the bean and make it really hard to cook it. So don't add salt at the beginning. If you salt them, you make them taste much better than without. Until they're soft. That'll take anywhere from 30 minutes for real soft grains to 3 hours for hard beans. You can actually cook grains in a rice cooker. It's a real simple way to do it. I usually cook it on the brown rice setting if you have it, and it'll cook it a little longer. I just did wheat berries like this a couple days ago. It worked great. Beans you can cook in a slow cooker. If you're going to cook them in a slow cooker, I leave them in there all day. So again, I soak them overnight. I rinse them in the morning. I throw them in the crock pot, put a couple inches of water over it with, sometimes I'll throw an onion, garlic, something like that in with it. Let it cook all day long. You'll be amazed. It actually smells really good all day long. And by the end of the day, you have enough food for today and probably tomorrow and the next day because these beans go a long way. You'd be shocked. Don't add acid to the beans. That's another thing. That's another thing that a lot of people will do is they'll put these dried beans into a soup that has a tomato base. They're going to cook very, very slowly in any sort of acid because the acid does the same thing as the salt. It toughens the outside of the coating and makes them cook very, very slowly. So cook them in water. That's where they're going to cook the quickest. And then add the other things. Drain it off if you want. When I'm making like a refried bean, I actually just blend it right up blend the water, the cooking water right into the bean. But if you're going to add something like a tomato soup, something like that to it, do it after the cooking is done. So for pennies, you can feed an army with these grains and beans. I really challenge you. Pick one of them that you want to try. Whatever bean you think you might like the most, maybe try a black bean. They're actually really easy because they're a little bit smaller. Try a white bean. Try whatever kind. Just pick a bean and just buy a bag of dried beans and try it. You know, one that's really fun to do is a 7-bean mix because you get a lot of different yummy grain that's not rice. Rice you probably already tried. Else that isn't rice. Pick, maybe a quinoa. Although quinoa smells funny. And make sure that when you cook quinoa, you rinse it really well in hot water before you cook it because it has something called a saponin on the outside that gives it a funky taste and it's not as good for you. So make sure you rinse it really well. But, try something else. Amaranth. We had some amaranth cereal the other day. It was delicious. Buckwheat. Just some of these grains. Just try them out. Give it a try. And for pennies, you're going to be able to feed your family. Whole meats. Okay, this is another one that's really interesting. So if you ever have gone to the grocery store and look at meat, if you look at the boneless, skinless chicken breasts, you're going to find that they're going to be upwards of $6, $7 a pound. Whereas if you look at the whole chicken, you're going to get a whole chicken for $10. So how much are you going to be able to use those boneless, skinless chicken breasts for versus how much are you going to be able to use that whole chicken for? what we do with our family, and we just did this on Sunday. So I cooked a whole chicken, cooked it with some delicious Greek spices, up underneath the skin, lemon, garlic, oregano. It was delicious. That fed 8 of us for Sunday dinner. And then Monday, I used the leftover chicken and made a chicken soup, chicken vegetable soup. I also used the bones from that chicken and made the broth for that soup. So that entire chicken became dinner number 2 on Monday. The leftovers from dinner number 2 on Monday became lunch on Tuesday. So we had 3 big meals out of that one chicken. I dare you to get, a pound of boneless, skinless chicken breast and have it do that. First of all, you're never going to be able to make the broth off of that because the broth came from the bones. And you're just not going to get the same value out of that. So I really encourage you to get whole meats. Get meats with bones in it. I know that sounds crazy, but the bones can be used for bone broth. Extra parts and pieces that maybe you don't want to be eating can be cooked and used for dog food. Think about these things. The bones can be used for soup. Just today, I was telling my kids I was going to make a broth for some udon soup this weekend. And I said, I have some soup bones. And my son was like, well, what are soup bones? So they're bones that don't have a lot of meat on them. They have some marrow and things. And you cook them really low and slow, and it creates a really nutritious, delicious broth. Those are pennies on the dollar, that kind of meat. It's healthier, actually. So a lot of the good fats that are in these meats come out into the broths that you're using. There's a lot of minerals that come into the broths. They're very good for you. There was a really interesting study that I read that showed there were people that were going to this particular doctor and after they had heart attacks. And he said a lot of times these were middle-aged men. Middle-aged men were coming, they'd had a heart attack, and their thin, really health conscious wife was dragging them into the office. And so in a effort of solidarity, he'd change both of their diets. So he'd get a food list from the wife, a food list from the husband. And the husband was, you can kind of imagine things that would typically lead to a heart attack. The wife was boneless, skinless chicken breasts, all whole wheat bread, if eating bread at all, lots of veggies, those sorts of things. What he found is that the wife was typically less healthy than the husband and worse shape than the husband. The reason is because the way she was eating oftentimes left out a lot of good fats out of the diet, left out a lot of good nutrients that come from things like fat-soluble vitamins that are in animal fats and butter and some of those things that she was avoiding like the plague. Well, they weren't leading to a healthy body. So these things can actually make you healthier. You can use it for more meals, like I said. Bulk versus packaged. Again, if you check the grocery store, you'll see you can get like a big chunk of cheese for $2 a pound, whereas those bags of cheese, if you ever price them by the pound, they're going to be $7 to $10 a pound. So take your cheese home and grate it yourself. These are ways to save some money. There's all sorts of things that you can buy in bulk. If you buy meat, again, and go back to meat, these are some of the more expensive things. This is why we talk about them. If you go back to meat, if you buy it in bulk quantities, freeze it very, very well. Remember, again, air is your enemy, especially in the freezer. You want to double wrap it, double seal it, make sure it's really sealed up tight. Never, ever freeze that meat in the package that comes from the grocery store. The plastic on that is extremely thin. The styrofoam doesn't do anything good for you. So make sure you repackage it. But if you can buy things in bulk grains, bulk beans, go to those bulk bins. That's the place where you're going to really save some money, and you're going to be able to stretch those dollars. Okay, prepared foods. This is a big place where you can save money as well. Potato chips, granola bars, bread, and tortillas. These are all things that we probably called staples, but we bought them at the store as staples. On the blog, I have some recipes. So if you go to the website, there's a blog that has a whole bunch of recipes on there. I think it's going to be posted tomorrow. Has a whole bunch of recipes for these exact things. Now we're making so much bread, we're probably going to turn into a loaf of bread around here. But we're making sourdough bread that's absolutely to die for. Like yesterday, it turned into sourdough pretzels. We've had sourdough waffles, pita bread, pancakes, flatbread, all sorts of things. Cinnamon rolls, those are the number one thing. But making bread is actually quite simple and extremely cost effective. So I put a very simple recipe on the blog that'll come out tomorrow. Tortillas, so simple. It's made from masa flour and water. That's it. That's all it is. That's all it takes to make a tortilla, flour tortilla. Granola bars, You know what they are because you look at them, you see what the ingredients are, potato chips. These things are all simply done at home. We just are so used to not. But this is a great way to save money and actually get food that's healthier. Okay, everybody knows that old adage, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. Um, my grandmother is someone that I've really always looked up to as far as making do. She had 9 children, 8 daughters and 1 son, which I can only imagine. And they only had like 1.5 bathrooms, which I can only imagine with that as well. But my grandfather was often a traveling salesman. He was gone a lot. They didn't have a lot of money. So my grandma really made do. She used things and used things and used things till there wasn't any use left. And I watched her do things like, oh, if she emptied a bottle of spaghetti sauce, she'd put a little bit of water inside that jar and swish it around to get every last little bit out. And I watched my mom do the same thing because she learned from her mom. Just some little things like that that I think when we're so used to having things, we forget about. So let's just talk about some things in this picture. Peelings. Peelings, these go down the garbage disposal, right? Well, no, peelings actually, if they're clean, you can throw them in a bag, pop them in the freezer, and when it's time to make some broth, throw those in with the broth. You can make a delicious vegetable broth, just like in the picture up here at the top, with just the peelings from things that you cooked earlier. If nothing else, use them for compost. So throw them in a bucket. Every single day we take the bucket outside. It goes to our chickens. But before we had chickens, we just stuck it in the yard. Literally, stick it underneath the bush, stick it wherever. Make sure there's no meat in that because that's going to go rotten. The food, the vegetable, fruit clipping, trimmings, those sorts of things, they're going to just compost and degrade down to the ground. Meat's going to go bad. So don't put anything meat or egg based in, basically animal based, in that compost bucket, but everything else can go in there and now it becomes part of your garden. So there's a lot of ways to use things up from our kitchen. So these are some of the things that we do as well. Veggies, any veggies. So let's say that, you get into the produce drawer in your fridge and you think, gosh, I've got like this tiny little bit of broccoli left and maybe a quarter of an onion and, a little bit of leftover lettuce. What am I going to do? I'm just going to throw it. There's just not enough here to do anything with. That's not true. There's always enough to do something with. Even if you just cut it up and throw it in the freezer and use it later, that's a great way to use it. Veggies always can be a stir fry, a bowl, or a salad. Always. Those are always things you can make. And sometimes you only need like a couple little things of each. But when they're all mixed together, they come out into a great combination. Bread. Bread can turn into a lot of other different things as well. You can make breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are simple. You toast it in the oven, throw it in your blender, you got breadcrumbs. Now you mix that in with meat and it becomes a filler. That's how you make meatloaf. That's how you make meatballs. You mix it in with that. It becomes a filler. It makes the meat stretch, but it also fills you up a little bit more. And as a binder, holds it all together. So you can make breadcrumbs, croutons, topping for casserole, filler for meat, like I said, mixed with eggs. We made a delicious French toast casserole last week. I think I put the recipe on the blog, so check that out. We just completely made it up. We had like an old pear sitting around, or actually it was an apple. An old apple sitting around, cut it up. It wasn't one that you probably would have eaten otherwise. Had some old bread, had a few eggs, some half-used can of coconut milk in the fridge, basically turned it all into this French toast casserole, and everybody raved about it. It was a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's just using some creativity. Bones, we've already talked about that, but how do you make it? You basically take the bones from whatever it is that you had, you cover it in water. I usually go for at least an inch above the water, above the level of whatever's in there. Cook it for 20 hours, literally 20 hours on low in a crock pot, basically all night and half into the day. Then it's ready for dinner the next day, or simmer for 3 to 4 hours on low on the stove if you don't have a crock pot. So there are some things that you can do to really make your food stretch. Now, one advantage that we have over my grandma is that we have the internet. So if you have a couple weird, random, odd little things in your kitchen and you think, how in the world am I going to turn this into something? Type those ingredients into the internet. All of a sudden you come with 500 recipes that use those exact things. And you'll think, I didn't think there was anything I could make out of this. Well, guess what? There is. Low-cost staples for filling, flavor, and health. So these low-cost staples are things that you can have on hand that if you have them, you can make all sorts of meals, especially by adding just a thing here or there, a little bit of lettuce, a little bit of, some things that are fresh, like we try to get bananas, avocados, lettuce. Those are some things we always have fresh, but these staples help fill it all in. So some things that are very inexpensive, eggs. very inexpensive, very good filler in a lot of things. We already talked about dried beans, dried grains, those kinds of things. If you have those on hand, you can always get a meal on the table. It's just the way it is. Sweet potatoes, a really great, healthy, nutritious option to use as a filler. Dried fruit will make everything taste a little bit better. Canned vegetables. Now, I know there's, talk about canned vegetables are not nearly as good as fresh. I agree, 100%. But guess what? If you can't get or you can't afford the fresh vegetable, the canned vegetable is better than something else. It's better than a bag of potato chips for sure. So have some canned vegetables. They can really add bulk and add variety to a meal with sometimes just some other boring ingredients. They can add some bulk and variety to it. Leftover makeovers. So this one is one that we do a lot in our home. We have pretty much lived off of leftovers for years. My kids have attended a school that did not have school lunch. So I have boys that are 20 now, so they went from first grade all the way through 12th grade at this school, and not once did they have school lunch. So we had to come up with lunches, and I'm not a big sandwich eater. I just don't like sandwiches. And we typically don't eat a ton of bread, apparently till the COVID virus. Now we do. But we just didn't have a lot of bread on hand. We didn't have a lot of lunch making ingredients. And I don't like all of the prepackaged stuff, Rice Krispies treats, whatever. I don't like that stuff. So what we have done for probably 15 years or more is I just make extra for dinner. And then after dinner, we pull the pots, pans, bowls, whatever over to the bar. Everybody sets out containers. We make lunch for everybody. Everybody pops on the lid, sticks it in the lunchbox. The lunchbox goes in the fridge overnight. So that has been our routine for 15 years. We know what to do with leftovers. Usually we just use them straight up, just exactly as they were for the dinner the night before. But we have always used leftovers. Now we're not all leaving to go to school, leaving to go to work, leaving wherever. So we're still using leftovers as they are, but we're doing some other things too. When I was growing up, my mom, she didn't like leftovers. She still doesn't like leftovers. But once a week or so, we would have like a leftover buffet. So she'd set out all the containers with all the leftovers in it. You'd pile up your plate and pop it in the microwave, and that's what you'd have for dinner. Well, it wasn't ever my favorite. It wasn't anybody's favorite, but it was a good way to use up leftovers. I don't usually do the leftover buffet because what I do is I try to make it into something that somebody's going to like even better than the first thing it was. And it's amazing how you can do that. So we call it like clean out the fridge, super stir fry. There is so many different ways to use. Let's say you have some leftover rice, and this was just literally today. I had some leftover rice and curry. Well, guess what? That leftover rice, curry with some broth and maybe a fresh carrot or two is now a curry rice soup. So there are so many things that you can do to just make over the food you already have. Stir fry is great. Throw everything in together, break an egg over the top of it, and you've now got a delicious stir fry, whereas it was maybe 4 different meals before that you've all thrown it together. Kitchen sink salad. Salads, one of my daughter's friends, her mom asked me one time, she said, will you give me like what you use for the salad dressing? Because my daughter will eat salads at your house and she doesn't like to eat salads at home. And I kind of chuckled because I thought, well, it's not the salad dressing. I think it's probably the salad itself, because a lot of people think of salad as iceberg lettuce, a tomato, some chopped up carrots, maybe some celery if you get a little fancy. I don't like that kind of salad at all. That's my least favorite kind of salad. Throw a little ranch on top. Oh, I don't even want to touch that. That's not my idea of a salad. A salad is, first of all, some delicious greens, and you can find so many good delicious greens these days. Delicious greens with all sorts of yummy stuff on top. So we're going to pull whatever we have in the fridge, and that's going to be a topping now for salad. And you'd be amazed how many delicious things you can find that you can put on top. What I really encourage you to do when you're trying to think about leftovers or using up what's in your fridge or any of those kinds of things is think about what you've eaten at a restaurant before. So you look in the fridge and you go, okay, there's some leftover zucchini. I don't really feel like just having leftover zucchini for lunch. So what am I going to do with this zucchini? So you start thinking, okay, where have I had zucchini before? Let's think. All right. Well, actually, I had zucchini with a pasta dish once. That was pretty delicious. Yeah, actually, I had zucchini on a kebab once. That was good. I've had something with like zucchini noodles before. Just start thinking, what have I had zucchini in before? then think, well, okay, that pasta dish. Do I have any pasta? I actually do have like half a box of pasta over here. Okay, well, what else could go on in a pasta dish? I got some Parmesan cheese. Just start thinking, what have I had before that has these things in it? That's the way I look at the fridge. I just open it up and I just look. I think, okay, what's in there that I've had and something that sounds good that I've already eaten before? And that's what I like to think of. Makeover wrap, anything can go inside of a tortilla and now it's a wrap. Again, think of wraps at restaurants. Think of salads at restaurants. They have all sorts of ingredients on there. We think a salad is a set thing, but it's so not. They throw all sorts of things on top. They throw all sorts of things inside of a wrap. If you put a yummy dressing, a yummy spread in there, that's going to be delicious. Smoothie mix-up. Okay, so I have thrown some crazy things in smoothies in the years, and you can usually make them taste pretty good. Sometimes the kids are rebellious and they won't eat them, but usually they're pretty good. Just this morning, I have some lettuce growing out in a cold frame in my garden right now. And it's been so warm that it was bumping up at the top against my cold frame and it kind of gotten a little brown and wilty at the top. So I cut it all down yesterday and put it in a bowl that sat out on the counter for like another 2 hours, and it got even wiltier before I got it in the fridge last night. So I looked at that and it was a whole big bowl. I looked at that this morning and I thought, that's a smoothie right there. So I had a couple cups of water in my blender. I stuffed the entire blender full of this lettuce. And when I say stuffed, I mean stuffed. My daughter came by and she looked at me and she said, is that for everyone? Because she's used to me eating that kind of stuff. She doesn't necessarily like herself eating that sort of stuff. I said, yeah, just wait. So I blended all the lettuce and the water up, and it came down to, went down to almost nothing by the time it was all blended in. Then I added in some delicious fruits, some frozen mulberries we have, a banana. And before we knew it, we had a delicious smoothie, and nobody knew it had like 2 gallons of lettuce in there. But it was a way to use that green, give us a ton of nutrients, and it just blends up. Nobody knows. It disappears inside of there. One thing that's really important to remember is there is a way to make anything taste good. So I want to give you this trick right now. I learned this from a book called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. I love the book. There's also a documentary. I think it's on Netflix. I think that's where we watched it. So everybody's watching Netflix right now. Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. It's 4 different documentaries. There's one each time, and they're super interesting. It's a woman named Samin Nosrat, and she teaches how to make food taste good. So these are her tricks. The heat one I leave out, and it's not like spicy heat. It's the way you cook it. We're not going to talk about that one as much, but if you have a dish, as long as you've managed that there's a salty component in there, and sometimes that's just plain old salt, a fat component, so that's going to be a vegetable fat like an avocado, coconut milk, something like that, or an actual fat like an olive oil, fat from a meat. Make sure there's a fatty component. It doesn't have to be heavy, just a little bit of fat in there. And then an acid, make sure there's an acid component. A lot of times if you taste something and you think, this isn't that great, if you squeeze a lemon on it, squeeze a lime on it, put a little bit of apple cider vinegar on it, boom, it wakes that dish up and now it's delicious. So just tonight I made a really strange soup because I had some bok choy in my greenhouse and radishes in my greenhouse, and I had some zucchini going bad in the fridge, and I thought, okay, what am I going to make? I found this recipe for this really weird bok choy curry soup with zucchini noodles. I know it just sounds odd. So I started making it, and it just wasn't that great. And I knew this one wasn't going to go over well. So I thought, okay, I know how to do this. So I squeezed a lime in there. I added a little bit of fish sauce. So we were kind of doing a Thai theme. Fish sauce is salty. Lime is the acid. It already had fat because it had coconut milk in it. All of a sudden, it tasted delicious. And it looked a little odd, but my son, he's like, actually, this tastes really good, Mom. So it just took those 3 things, a little salt, a little fat, and a little acid. And you can make anything that you throw together taste good. Your family will be shocked that, hey, this came out of the fridge. Seriously? How does this taste so good? A little salt, a little fat, a little acid. Anything's going to taste good. Okay, make expensive ingredients the star, not the bulk of your meal. One thing that we do, especially when we've had large groups, so we had 9 living in our house at one time. So every meal had 9, and then we were lining up containers for 9 lunches the next day. So I was cooking for 18 every dinner. I had to use a lot of these things that I'm talking to you about right now. But one of the things that we figured out is that sometimes our eyes are bigger than our stomach. And sometimes and I don't mean to be a gender biased here, but sometimes boys, especially teenage boys, don't realize that there are like 8 other people in the house that need food too. So what we started doing is, for food that either had expensive ingredients or we knew we were a little tight on maybe how much we had, we would pre-dish it out. I still do this a ton. I often do this with breakfast, because breakfast, people kind of come and go a bit. And so I pre-dish it out so everybody gets their share and nobody has to worry, oh, how many people have eaten? How much should I leave? That sort of thing. So we pre-dish it out. It's a great way to really kind of make your meal stretch, because oftentimes if you eat what's on your plate, it's enough. That's enough. I mean, my son, he usually gets up from dinner and goes and has another dinner because he's 14. He goes and has something else as soon as he gets up. And, that's just the way he is right now. It's okay. But the most of us, it's enough. It's enough what's on our plate. If we do meat, very, very rarely do I actually just do meat as an entree. Usually meat is in the thing. And we don't do meat a lot. I don't think we've had meat in about 4 days actually at our house right now, because we're eating out of a greenhouse, we're eating out of the root cellar, we're eating out of storage. There's just not a lot of meat. I do have some meat in the freezer, but we don't use it a ton. If I do, I really make it stretch. So meat becomes part of a casserole, part of a stew, part of a stir fry, something like that, where I can take a little bit and make a lot bit out of it by adding some of these other staples that we've already talked about. If I do have meat like that chicken for the Sunday, what I did is I pre-sliced it all. And sometimes I'll even take half of it away because I know I need that for tomorrow's meal. And I'll just leave what's available for today's meal, but I slice it. It makes it look nicer when you slice it. My daughter-in-law actually said, "Ooh, that looks nice. I'm going to take a picture." So we sliced it, and then everybody takes as much as they need. And it's kind of pre-dosed out, so you know how much it goes. So if you have expensive ingredients, that's a good way to do it. You can cut meat in half by using grains or beans. The other day I was cooking some wheat berries, cooked them in the rice cooker, which is a great way to do it. And I did half and half ground beef with wheat berries, and that became our taco filling. It was delicious. It was kind of chewy. It was good. It was good. It's a great way to do it. Use eggs as filler. Eggs actually are a really inexpensive source of protein. You can use them as a filler in a lot of things. They'll kind of bulk out some things. Use the entire vegetable. So some vegetables are more expensive than others. Things like broccoli. We use the top, the florets part, and then we chuck the rest in the compost bin or in the garbage disposal. Well, I found a recipe that was just for broccoli stems. There's a lot of good uses for those things. So instead of just instantaneously, without thinking about it, chucking it, think, what could I do with this? I think I could just cut this up and eat this. This is fine. This is the same vegetable. Today, that weird soup that I made, it was supposed to have cilantro in the broth. I didn't have any cilantro, so I used the tops from the radishes that I picked out in the greenhouse. Blended those up instead of cilantro. Gave it a slightly different flavor, but nobody knew what it was supposed to taste like anyway, so it was fine, and it tasted just fine. Use inexpensive sides. So sometimes if you feel like, oh gosh, the main dish is going to just barely make it for how many people I'm feeding, add a couple inexpensive side dishes, like an egg drop soup. That's like a super good go-to in our house. It's some broth, it's some salt, and it's an egg. You stir it in, all of a sudden you give everybody a little cup of egg drop soup. They start their meal with that. It fills them up a bit, and then what you have on the plate is plenty. Other sides that are great: cut up a cucumber, make a side salad. We always start with a salad in our house, so make a salad, start with that. Lettuce goes a long way, and lettuce is really quite inexpensive actually. So some of those things as sides will really help to extend the more expensive parts of the meal as well. And one of the big ones that I encourage is meal planning, because meal planning, what you do with meal planning is you think, okay, I'm going to have, let's use that same old broccoli. I'm going to have broccoli in this stir fry. Well, I'm not going to use the entire broccoli in that stir fry, and I'm probably not going to use the stems. So what else during the week could I use the remainder of that broccoli in and the stems? Okay, well, here's another dish. Here's a casserole that I can mix it into that would actually work great. So now, because you planned out your meal, you're planning to not have any waste. You're planning to use every single bit of what you've purchased while making the meals through the week. Now, meal planning is good for many, many reasons. I always, before I leave the house for work, I try to have something either in the rice cooker or the crock pot, because my willpower is the lowest when I get home from work at night. And this is just scientifically proven. It's the same for all of us. When we're tired, we're hungry, we are going to have very low willpower. So I get home from work and I think, my gosh, let's just go out to eat. Right now we can't do that. But in the old days, like as of 3 weeks ago, I'd say, oh, let's just go out to eat tonight. But if I have something in the rice cooker or something in the crock pot, I don't say that. I go, oh, there's already something sitting there. Either, yay, it's all done, or, okay, well, there's at least rice in the rice cooker. That gets me halfway there. I can quickly throw something else together. And it pushes me past that fatigue place where I'll stay and I'll actually cook the meal. Or, hey, I've already got it planned out. I've already got it planned out. Here's the ingredients. It's already ready. It's just going to take me 15 minutes. I've already got the recipe all printed out. It's ready to go. It's going to save so much of that. I'm too tired. I don't know what to make. Those are the reasons that we don't do this. Or, gosh, I didn't think ahead. I didn't think I had to plan, soak those beans. In my meal planning, I put night before preps. So when I get done with a meal, we finish up the dishes, I pop that open. I go, okay, what am I supposed to do tonight? All right, I'm supposed to soak 2 cups of rice. Easy, done. Pour 2 cups of rice in a bowl, cover it with water. I'm done for the night. That was my nightly prep. Or pull some meat out of the freezer. Okay, pull the meat out of the freezer. Whatever it is, I put that as part of my meal planning, so that I know the night before what I need to do to be able to prep for the next day. Otherwise, again, it'll sabotage you. You'll get to the next day, you're like, shoot, I didn't soak those beans. Okay, well, let's just go out, or whatever it might be. Meal planning will, and it's not foolproof. There's still times when I'm like, okay, I didn't do that last night. I was too tired, whatever it might be. But it is, I would say it's 80% effective. 80% of the time, it saves my butt, because I come home from work, there's already food in the crock pot, or I've already got something soaking on the counter and it's already ready to go, and we're going to have a great meal that night. Or my kids know. They go, oh, there's the recipe. There's what's sitting out on the counter. We can put this together. So it's a great way to save a ton of money and use up what you have. So hopefully that gives you some ideas. Hopefully it gives you some starting places for food, for how to use up what you have, for how to stretch your dollar. There's a lot of specifics on the blog, so make sure you go to totalcaredental.com. We have health information right at top of the navigation bar, and when you go there, you're going to see all of the posts, all of the recipes. There's also a lot of information. About how to do things like soaking grains and soaking weed and all those kinds of things. So make sure you go to the blog. We're going to start doing at least weekly webinars, maybe even more. We've had a great response to these webinars, and we really like to provide this information for you. So next week, next Thursday, 7 p.m., is going to be gardening how-tos for everyone in any yard and any skill level. All right, now I've just been told that there are some questions, but I can't get to the questions. So somebody's going to have to help me get to those questions. Let me see if I can find them here. Nope. So whoever just gave me the questions is going to have to show me how to get to the questions. We don't know how to do this. So I might have to answer questions on an email after, because I'm not seeing any questions on here. So there might be some, and if they are, I apologize to you. I will send out an email with answers to you. Hopefully that this has been helpful information for you. Hopefully you've enjoyed what we have to share, and you'll keep watching and looking for information, because this is the stuff I love. This honestly just keeps me excited. I love to share these things, and I love to help all of you live better. That's really what Living Well with Dr. Michelle is all about, is living better in the life that we're in. Thank you so much for watching tonight, and go make some delicious food out of everything you have in your fridge. Thank you all.